Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Spinning Back Clique, the show that takes you on a quick spin through the week's news. And on this week's show, we'll play Overreaction or On the Money as we look back at the controversial finish to the bantamweight title fight this weekend, the impact of Jan Blachowicz's win over Israel Adesanya. We'll take a look at what Amanda Nunes' latest win has done to the women's featherweight division, and we'll talk 10-8 rounds to wrap things up this week. But let's kick things off with that bantamweight clash at UFC 259, guys, where Peter Yan was disqualified for a deliberate illegal knee to a clearly grounded Aljamain Sterling. It meant that Sterling was crowned champion, and there's been a lot of reaction online with some suggesting that winning by DQ delegitimizes a title win. So let's kick things off this week with our first sweeping statement. You're not a legitimate champion if you win via disqualification. Is that an overreaction or is it on the money? We'll do 3 minutes on the clock. And first off, it's Mike Bomb.
I think that is on the money. I mean, I have sat here in this chair, worked many a Sunday morning following big UFC fights, big UFC title fights, and it just did not feel like Aljamain Sterling was the true champion the day after. It did not feel like we crowned a new champion on the Sunday morning after UFC 259. So definitely it does not feel like a legitimate title win for Aljamain Sterling. I think he will even say as much himself. That's why he wants to do the rematch. That's why you don't see him celebrating out there with the belt and all these different things. So yeah, definitely on the money, especially the way the fight was going down. It was definitely trending in Peter Yan's direction when that illegal knee happened. So I think maybe if Aljamain Sterling was winning the fight and Peter Yan committed that foul, maybe just out of desperation or something like that, maybe we'd feel a little bit differently, but it did not feel like Aljamain Sterling was going to win that fight as it was. And then of course, the way it went down, the title changing hands, we've never seen that before. So definitely does not feel like a legit title win, but that is not Aljamain Sterling's fault either.
On the money. Guys, come on. At the end of the day, there was no conclusion to this fight. We don't know who the better fighter was. It ended because of a nasty foul. And that doesn't really give us what we all want. What we want to see is a fighter lift up the belt, somebody who's earned that. Aljamain Sterling earned the right to be there that night, but I don't know that he earned the right to hold that belt. And fighters work their entire lives to get to that moment. And to have it go down that way, it really sucks. It doesn't just suck for the fans, the promotions, it sucks for the fighter. And I think the fighter is the one that really told us the answer to this question. It was Aljamain Sterling who left the belt on the ground. He didn't even feel like he won the belt that night. So I think he told us that it was on the money. What do you think, Farah?
On the money as well. Definitely, because it's a tough situation for Aljamain Sterling, of course. Like you said, he didn't want to wrap that belt around him. He threw it down right away. But I think in a situation like that, the title should just be vacant. I mean, Peter Yan did commit the foul. It was a blatant illegal knee, whether he knew the rules or not, or there was a miscommunication with his corner. But at the end of the day, it was a clear-cut illegal knee. And I think in a situation like that, the title should be vacant. I don't think Aljamain Sterling should be the champion.
Guys, this is not the WWE. You know, the belt changes hands with a disqualification. I think there's rules in this business, right? If you win, you can win by submission, you can win by knockout, you can win by decision, and you can win by disqualification. It is in the rules. It's in the rule book. It's unfortunate. It's the least acceptable way to win, I guess. But nonetheless, Aljamain Sterling is a legitimate champion, at least in my eyes and in the record book's eyes. But we will see whether he can hang on to it when they book a rematch. Dana White wants to make that rematch as early as possible, he said in the post-fight press conference. So fingers crossed we will get a resolution to this a little bit later on in 2021. But guys, let's look at the main event of the evening as Israel Adesanya's attempt to become a two-division champion fell short on the scorecards as he was outpointed by light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz. But what does it mean for the potential super fight that we've been hearing about for ages between Israel Adesanya and Jon Jones a bit further down the line? So let's do our next sweeping statement here. Israel Adesanya versus Jon Jones definitely won't happen now. Is that an overreaction or is it on the money? We'll do 3 more minutes on the clock for this. And Ghost, you can lead off.
Overreaction. This is definitely going to happen. The problem is this. When it happens, nobody's going to care. And when it happens, it might be years from now. Look, part of the intrigue of this fight, what made us all want to see this fight, was the fact that you had an undefeated fighter, somebody that could come in and possibly test the great Jon Jones. He's not undefeated anymore. That mystique is kind of gone. So here's what we know. John Jones is a heavyweight now, and Israel Adesanya is a middleweight. He's going to stay there, and he's probably going to reign there for a while. So really, what is the point? What is the point of making this fight happen anytime soon? The problem is it makes a lot of money, and these guys cannot stay off Twitter, and they're going to go at each other. So at some point, we're going to need some kind of conclusion to all of this. But it ain't going to happen for a while. It's going to go on for about at least 2 years before we see anything like this. Farrah, am I overreacting?
I actually think the statement's on the money. I don't see the fight happening for a simple reason, is that John Jones bulking up to heavyweight is what is kind of making me hesitant about this whole thing, because once he bulks up to heavyweight, depending on the success he has, how's he going to go down the frame? I'm not saying, because Adesanya said it, he doesn't necessarily, if he's going to fight at light heavyweight again, he doesn't necessarily think about putting on that weight. He did say that he won't rule out heavyweight, but at the end of the day, if you've got a bulked up John Jones and Adesanya who's not necessarily focused on building himself to a light heavyweight frame, I'm not sure if it's going to happen or not, because I do think the mystique, like you said, was the idea of Adesanya being undefeated and John Jones being undefeated, of course, him as well, minus that one blemish. But now the mystique has gone down a little bit, and I just don't know. I think it depends on the success that John Jones has at heavyweight, and I see Adesanya staying at middleweight for right now. This put a halt in his momentum, and I don't see it happening. I don't think we're going to see the fight. How about you, Mike?
I tend to agree. I think the statement is on the money. Right now, it does not feel like the momentum is heading that direction. John Jones basically saying it would be a waste of his time at this point, and he's not at all interested. And I can understand why that is the case, considering how this loss came to be for Israel Adesanya. You never know what could happen in the future. Never say never, as Izzy said at the post-fight press conference. But you just look at the trajectories of both these men. Izzy's going to go back to middleweight, defend his title there. Who knows how that's going to go? Maybe guys have more confidence now that they've seen him lose, going in there and trying to attempt a strategy, attempt a game plan. We don't know if more losses are going to come. And the same can be said for John Jones. Potentially he loses at heavyweight and the momentum gets derailed there. There's just so many things that can happen where it does not feel like the stars are aligning for these two. Weirdly enough, I feel like the most likely scenario for this fight to happen is if maybe both guys do suffer some losses and we maybe get like an overdue kind of date, maybe like a Chuck Liddell versus Vanderlei Silva type of thing where it doesn't really mean much at the time or nearly as much as it could have.
Yeah, it looks as if they're both kind of going in different directions. One moving up, one moving down. So we'll see what happens in the coming months. But big questions at 145 pounds, guys, after the night's co-main event saw Amanda Nunes continue her dominant run as a two-division champion. She retained her featherweight title with a quick first round submission of Megan Anderson. But does her title win this weekend have bigger ramifications for that 145 pound division? Here's our next sweeping statement. Amanda Nunes just killed the UFC's women's featherweight division. Big statement, but is it an overreaction or is it on the money? We'll do 3 more minutes, and Farrah, you can go first.
I think it's on the money. I mean, honestly, right now, the only featherweight fight that you've got right now is Felicia Spencer and Danielle Wolf. Even if Danielle Wolf does beat Felicia Spencer, she has one pro fight, so definitely doesn't have the experience to go up against Amanda Nunes. Maybe the name with the boxing background and everything like that, but it would just seem pretty crazy for them to put that fight together if Danielle does win. And Felicia, Amanda just beat her. So I don't see who Amanda could fight right now. Dana did say that he'll plan on keeping the division alive as long as Amanda wants to defend that belt. They can always come up with somebody, I guess, to challenge Amanda, but I just don't see anyone out there for her. I don't know. Kayla Harrison's the only name that pops up in my mind, but she doesn't really have the experience yet. She's had one fight at 145. She's part of the PFL roster right now. So I don't know. I think I don't know about the future of the featherweight division. How about you, Mike?
Well, you cannot kill what was never really alive. So in my opinion, it's a bit of an overreaction. This weight class has never really existed, in my opinion. It's just one-offs here and there, a few fights booked occasionally. There's no depth to it. There's no official rankings at all. It's just kind of willy-nilly in terms of trying to get Amanda Nunes fights and kind of continue this double champ reign going for her. So yeah, there's never really been a UFC featherweight division, if you want to call it that. They're basically doing what we all wanted them to do with Chris Cyborg when she was in her prime. Just bring her over, give her this platform, book one-off fights here and there, and just basically give a platform for this amazing athlete that we have have in Amanda Nunes is the same way. She's obviously an incredible fighter. She deserves all the shine, having those 2 belts over her shoulder and all those kind of things, but it's not a real weight class. It never has been. They're not doing a ton to build it up. I mean, you just look, as far as said, this Felicia Spencer versus Danielle Wolf fight, it just seems like a crazy matchup on paper, but it's completely born out of necessities. So yeah, this has never been a real division, in my opinion. It's just Amanda Nunes really being able to continue her shine and have that kind of GOAT status with having the 2 belts. What do you think, Goes? Am I wrong here?
No, Mike, you're on the money. We just don't have the bodies to make this a successful division. And often I sit there and I think about it. I was so frustrated when we had such a tight leash on flyweights. Those guys come, they bang, they put on great performances, and yet they were the ones that were about to be shelved. And meanwhile, we had this division that really wasn't doing anything for anyone, and they were just taking up space. It really, really sucks for some of the fighters. Every time I see Dana White's Contender Series and somebody doesn't get a contract that looks like they maybe deserve it, and then I look at this division and I go, what are we doing here? It's so sparse. It doesn't make sense. The 2 biggest threats for Amanda Nunes aren't even in the UFC. They're in PFL and Bellator. So really, at the end of the day, we got to move on, guys.
And we will move on to our final question of the week. And after the main event on Saturday, Dana White kind of went off on one a little bit during the post-fight press conference as he railed against the increase in 10-8 scores that we're seeing in MMA right now. So to finish things off this week, I'm going to take a direct quote from the UFC president himself and tell you this. This 10-8 shit is out of control. Is it an overreaction or is it on the money? 3 minutes on the clock to finish. And Mike, you can lead off.
Overreaction. I mean, come on. Like that was one of the more surprising things that just seemed to control one of the narratives of Dana White's post-fight press conference. It's not out of control. And really, did it even make that big of an impact on this fight? Like, yes, you could argue we're giving Jan Blachowicz some 10-8 rounds in that fight against Israel Adesanya a little bit unnecessary. Did it seem like it wasn't 10-8 rounds? Yeah, you could say that, but it didn't change the outcome of the fight. Jan Blachowicz was still winning that fight on the scorecards, regardless of how you saw it. So I don't know how you can say it's out of control when it's really not changing the outcome of fights. It's not being a huge difference maker in that sense. In my opinion, I think they need to keep being a little more open with the scoring of 10-8 rounds. I think it's something that we need to see more in the sport. Yes, it may lead to like a draw or something here and there, but we need evolution in this game. We can't just continue sticking to the judging criteria and the things that got us here for so many years. They adjusted the criteria to have 10-8 rounds be more prevalent a few years ago. We're seeing it used here and there, and I think it's appropriate. We haven't seen anything outlandish or crazy to this date with the using of a 10-8. So, in my opinion, an overreaction from Dana White. What do you say, Goes?
Total overreaction. Come on, it's not out of control when it's warranted, and I felt like it really was warranted here. I think the problem is sometimes when you have Dana White, he has his business promoter hat on and he can't take it off. And I think some of that rubs off a little bit with his comments, because really his 10-8 problem usually revolves around grappling, stuff that happens on the ground that's not as exciting for the fans. So I understand where he's coming from, but those are the rules here, guys. And I think Mike's right. At the end of the day, our system was built for boxing, right? They need to revamp that scoring system. They need to do something, because some margin of victory in some of those rounds is way different than other rounds. It needs to make more sense for mixed martial arts. But right now, I think Dana is completely overreacting. I kind of like the 10-8s. What did you think, Farah? Close up shop.
I'm actually going to disagree with the both of you. I'm not too big of a fan of these 10-8s being thrown around, because when I look at the 10-8s that Jan was handed, yeah, he took Izzy down, yeah, he controlled him, but there was no real damage done there. When you compare it to Khabib's dominant rounds, then what are Khabib's rounds? 10-6s? Does that, like, when I look at it that way, I feel that some significant damage has to be inflicted. We can't be handing out 10-8 rounds. In this particular case, I thought Jan won the fight anyway, even if you were to give him a 10-9, and it didn't change the outcome here. But trust me, down the line, it's going to cause a lot of controversy when you have draws that aren't necessarily warranted because you're handing out 10-8 rounds so easily. I think that 10-8, yes, he controlled him with the grappling, but you have to look at damage as well. Because when you're looking at a round like Izzy had with Paulo Costa, where Paulo barely touched him on the feet, Izzy was firing, but did he do anything crazy? No, we weren't giving him 10-8s for that. So I think we need to be pretty clear with 10-8s in terms of damage. So I kind of agree with Dana on here. I'm not too big of a fan of handing out a 10-8 when no real damage was inflicted.
I don't mind the pride scoring. Just score the fight as a whole. It eliminates all that aggravation. Who's the winner? Who looks like they won the fight at the end of the fight? It's normally the person who should have won the fight. So we'll see how all this goes. I doubt there's going to be that much change. But hey, this is MMA. The sport is evolving. It is still a relatively new sport. That is all we've got for you on this week's episode of Spinning Back Clique. UFC Fight Night 187 is coming up. Leon Edwards is finally going to fight, ladies and gentlemen. He's taking on Bilal Muhammad in the main event. We will have full coverage throughout the week on MMA Junkie, so keep it locked to us right here. And we'll be back next week to unpack it all on Spinning Back Clique.